What the hell are you doing here, you filthy? Okay, hello there. That was the grapefruit or the wizard's glass. It's something that you won't actually understand what I'm talking about unless you've read the book, but I'll talk about it later. It's a kind of a crystal ball, a mischievous artifact of a wizard. And I don't like having it around the place, so whenever it appears, I give it a little headbutt. But anyway, okay, we're going to be looking today at this mighty tome of a book. It's the fourth in the Dark Tower series, Wizard and Glass. Now, at this point, I run the risk of sounding like a Dark Tower fanboy because I've raved about the previous three books. And this one is particularly good as well. A fantastic addition to the series, in my opinion. But I'm going to talk about why I liked it later as we go. But there's some other things that I wasn't so keen on, so we'll talk about that too. So this may not reach the heady heights of 5 stars, but we'll have to wait and see. As we go along, I'll be popping up other covers from various other editions that have appeared ever since it was published in 1997. But if you don't mind, for now, I'm just going to very quickly look at this battered old edition that I've got here. I'm going to have some scans up here for you to look at. So the front cover, as you can see, has been through the mill. One of those promotional stickers on the front that buy two for free, 3 for 2, whatever, has been scratched off inexpertly, so it looks like a bloody unsightly blemish. We've also got some heavy sunlight damage, which has turned that lovely purple into kind of turquoise colour, or turquoise if you prefer. The spine, for want of a better word, is shagged and is probably responsible for what happened when I started reading The Devil. I didn't get far into it before one of the pages parted company from its fellows and landed in my lap like a dead leaf from a rotten tree. But luckily, as I went on, no other pages fell out and it held its integrity. It's been very well read, and rightly so. It deserves it. But anyway, the last thing to do, of course, is to give the book a damn good sniffing to see what this one smells of. So, let's get into it. Ooh. Got a new technique. Ooh. Blue. Oh, this is it's got a... It's like kind of an almond smell. Apple pip. It's like an apple pip. You know, if you bite on an apple pip, you get that kind of acrid, bitter almond, kind of arsenic note. It smells of that. So, apple pip. Okay, there we are. Okay, so what I'm going to try to do now is attempt a brief synopsis, as brief as I can, of this 840-page beast. There won't be any spoilers as such, other than things you're probably already aware of if you're reading the series yourself. If you haven't read the first 3 books, you probably shouldn't be listening to this, but it doesn't really matter, I suppose. I'm not going to give away anything too naughty. So this one, the 4th book, begins where the 3rd one left off. So we've got Roland, Eddie, Susanna and Jake and that little bugger, what's he called? I can't remember, that little, not a beaver, a ferret type creature, shall we say, trapped on Blaine the Mono, that psychotic bastard of a train that's racing across Midworld at supersonic speed, intent upon killing them all unless they give him a riddle that he can't solve. So that's resolved quite nicely at the beginning. And spoiler alert, they managed to survive Blaine the Mono before he crashes. Right to the very end, actually. They didn't have much time left to spare. They emerge into a world that's a parallel world to our own. So it's Kansas in America, but Kansas not quite as they know it. I mean, it's more or less a facsimile of their own reality. But the first thing they realise is that the cars, there's a make of car that they see in this deserted parking lot that they've never heard of before. So it's just slightly skewed from our own reality. But this place that they discover has been subject to a terrible plague, a plague that has more or less wiped everyone out. And so this is an obvious reference, of course, to Stephen King's The Stand. This is very obvious if you've already read The Stand, that is. In fact, there are reading lists available online that recommend other things to read that are part of this kind of universe associated with the Dark Tower series. So this is The Stand at this point. So they begin travelling through this blasted land, encountering no humanity whatsoever other than dead corpses. Now, this beginning is merely a setting for what now transpires, which is a very, very lengthy flashback. So we've been waiting for this for some time now, but Roland finally sits down with his friends and tells him a story about his teenage years, shall we say. So this is a massive flashback. So yeah, if we consider, I've kind of reduced the other books to the first one being a kind of prologue. I almost said prolapse then. The second one being the choosing of the party for the quest. The third book being the quest itself starting properly. The fourth one is looking back in the past. But we've been looking forward to this for some time, or I have at least. Now this deals with the time following Roland beating Court in the battle and becoming a gunslinger. And so he's, after this, Roland's father kind of banishes Roland to this far-flung town, this backwater town called Magis, with his two friends Cuthbert and Elaine. Elaine. Yeah, something like that. And so basically they've been not exiled as such. Roland's father wants to distance them from the increasing dangers of living in Gilead. So yeah, he's trying to put them somewhere safe. Unfortunately, Magis is not a safe place at all. They soon discover that there's a plot afoot within the town. Sympathisers of John Farson, the good man, this kind of renegade fellow who's stirring up all this trouble and threatening the sanctity and the stability of Gilead. So they're actually producing lots of horses, and they're also providing lots of crude oil. It's quite odd, but to aid this John Farson character. Okay, and then running parallel to this kind of story, we have a love story. Something that's been hinted at in a number of, at least the second and third books, perhaps, I can't remember now, between Roland and this young girl called Susan Delgado. Yeah, that's right. And she's a 16-year-old girl who's been kind of bought, bought as a gilly, they call it in the book, but by the mayor of the town to produce children. His wife, middle-aged wife, is infertile, I think that's the gist of it, and he wants a nubile young lady to make some children for him. But he's a dirty old man, let's face it. So we've got that. There's this tension, this forbidden romance between Roland and Susan, and all the other stuff that's going on, this conspiracy and the danger that's implied within that. And that's all I'm going to say really about the main story, because that's pretty much all there is. But I'm not going to tell you anything else about what's going on. Maybe a little bit about the grapefruit, but that's coming up next. So now I'm going to talk about what I particularly loved about this book. And the first being that this is a story that I've been waiting for right from the very beginning, from the very first book when it was first teased about Roland's distant past, his becoming a gunslinger at the tender age of 14. So for me, this was a really fulfilling piece of backstory. Calling it a flashback isn't fair, really. I've seen other people referring it to a flashback. This is just this is world building, or it's lore building, history building. We've had these tantalizing glimpses of Roland's past, and now it's giving flesh and blood to that time, and it's such a wonderful period in the history of Midworld. It's interesting as well because it's on the cusp of change. So Gilead, the kind of seat of power within Midworld, giving law and order and kind of grace to the way people live, is already on shaky ground. But this is about the thing that starts tipping the balance, the evil that starts spreading through the world and trying to topple Gilead itself. So I absolutely loved that aspect of the backstory. The other thing I loved was the fact that you could tell, or I could tell, that Stephen King absolutely loved writing this backstory. It's unashamedly a Western in the tradition of the spaghetti westerns, perhaps. And he's made no bones about the fact that Roland is certainly informed by Clint Eastwood. And so it has the feel of watching a great Western film. It has the setting, it has the same kind of characters, wonderful characters actually, all really wonderfully realised. Even minor characters really have an impact on the story. But it also, you have the desert setting. There's also kind of Spanish words used as well. So and the things they're wearing as well, serapes. I think that's how you call them. I don't know. Things like that. But also it's butted up against what I initially imagined as a kind of standard medieval fantasy world. So you've got the lush green of the drop, which is where the horses all roam free. But that's butted up against desert land and this weird canyon that has a very strange thing lurking within it. But I'm not going to talk about that. You'll have to discover that yourself. But an area where reality is breaking down. Yeah, so that really appealed to me. Another thing which is kind of present within all preceding books is those anachronisms that invariably rear their head within Roland's world. We forget, especially reading this backstory, that this is another world or another time has existed before it. So this is a Western set within the ruins of a formerly advanced civilization. So there's one particular area within the town, on the outskirts of town, which is called Sitgo. And this is where all the oil pumping is going on. These kind of old oil derricks that are still pumping like hundreds, if not thousands of years later. They're all buggered, really. There's only a few of them still working. But there's a point in the book where it's an old parking lot again outside the oil pumping station, and there's this ancient ruin of a truck there with the name, or I think it's Chevrolet, and Roland describes it as this, this arcane, or a very odd word printed on this ancient vehicle. And obviously we know that that just brings you straight into it. It's like, wow, yes, of course, this is a ruined world, and they're living in the kind of dregs of this former world, but still making a go of it, if you will. Yeah, I loved that as well. Absolutely loved it. Finally, the love story itself is so strong. It's so well written, and it's loaded with such pathos. I mean, we know that this is kind of, it's going to be a tragic romance. I mean, everything is against them, but the way it's written and the way they keep meeting each other and gradually, very slowly, they realize they're falling in love with each other is so well done with such a deft touch. It makes me realize that really, I think Stephen King could write any genre and absolutely nail it. In the afterword, he talks about the fact that he had a lot of, he was worried about writing this love story. He envisaged it like 26 years ago. He envisaged this story when he was a far younger man, filled with the joys of being a young man and pursuing young women, I imagine. So he was then writing it as almost a middle-aged man, I suppose, but he still did justice to it. It was so good. It reminds you of being young yourself and, first love and all of that. I absolutely loved it. I can't say any more than that. But of course, there are some problems. There weren't many problems with the others that I found, but here a few things kind of got in the way slightly, but only slightly. First thing, I mean, going back to the old grapefruit that I had to bat out of the way. He's back again, get out of here. So this grapefruit, this seeing, it's a crystal ball, of course. It plays an integral part to the whole story and is responsible for a lot of the tragedy that unfolds for our heroes, or our hero Roland and his love Susan. But the fact that this really powerful object is first given to, so it's the possession of John Farson, this evil bugger who's causing all the problems, and it's a kind of a rip-off of Lord of the Rings in some ways. If you have the ring too long, obviously it starts possessing you and consumes you mentally. The same is true of this grapefruit. And so John Farson, he has to pass it around so that he doesn't get too enamored with it. And so they decide to give it to a witch who lives on the outskirts of the town. Rhea, she's called. Rhea of the Coos. She's a bloody horrible woman, actually. But in so giving it to her, she causes all manner of problems, which for me seems like, it works well in the story. You can't odds that. But if you look at it objectively, it wasn't the best thing to do. And it seems like a very, just a device to allow the story to go along. The other problem, of course, is that Roland has mentioned his old friends a number of times in the past with a terrible sadness associated with them, including his love, Susan. So we already know from the outset that things probably aren't going to go to plan. So you're reading it, there's no real hope that things are going to turn out the way you want them to. So there's that implied pathos throughout that you're observing a tragedy that is already going to play out. That said, things that I expected did happen, but then some other things didn't. So I'll leave it at that. It's not all doom and gloom. But there we are. Yeah, that's one little issue with just the way this is written. That's just the way it is. The last negative thing I'll say about is once this story is concluded and they're back on their path through this kind of strange version of Kansas, they encounter, this is a spoiler, but I wouldn't worry too much. They encounter the Emerald City. Now, this is a direct reference, of course, to, I was going to say Alice in Wonderland then, but the Wizard of Oz. And so they actually encounter the Wizard of Oz. It's kind of, this for me was a step too far in terms of appropriating worldly or fiction of our world that has some kind of relation to Roland's world, if you know what I mean. It seemed a step too far for me. And there's also a reappearance of a character that we encounter, a bad guy that we encountered in the third book, who makes an appearance briefly, but serves no real purpose. So anyway, there we are. There's a few things I wasn't so keen on, but on balance, absolutely loved it. So right, we're going to have to give a rating to this. I've oscillated between a few different ratings for this, ranging from 4 stars to 4.5 stars to 5 stars. I've settled on 4. Okay, so 4 for me is still a great book. I mean, it's not, I don't think it's quite as good as the preceding 3, but it's still worthy of its place in the fourth position within the series, if you know what I mean. It's still a great book, but yeah, it could have been better. Anyway, let's leave it there. I'm rambling again. Thanks for watching if you have to this point. There'll be another book review, perhaps a book haul next week, I don't know. But stay tuned and I'll be back with you soon. Cheerio.